Hello and welcome in. I'm Collette Wieland alongside Dr. Stephen Camarata. Steve is here to talk to us today about late talking children. One of the things that, I think a lot of parents wonder is, when should I start questioning if my child's a late talker? So is there an appropriate age where you should be maybe worried?
So what happens is people nowadays are so informed, and it's a great thing.
It's because of Google.
The Google, yes, Google Mom, and they'll hear something like first word should happen by 12 months, and then inevitably I get an email when the child's 12 months and 2 days. I'm exaggerating, but actually the normal, if you think about where 90% of the children start talking, it's by around 16 to 18 months. So if a child isn't using words when they're 12 months, 13 months, 14 months, that still could be not even late talking, could just be normal variation. And so the caveat is if a child has Down syndrome or there's a genetic condition like Rett syndrome, clearly we're going to want to do some very early scaffolding to help, because we know they're going to take a little bit longer to learn. But just for most people, normally, what I say is 16, 18 months. If they're not using words in a way that's communicative, then, that's just an indication that they're a late talker.
I use the word worried, and I actually don't really like that word when I say that.
But it's true.
It's true. It is. And, you want your kids to hit all of those typical milestones, right? But that's not always the case.
Yeah, no, actually nobody hits all the typical milestones. It's funny when you just mentioned that. I just had this. I remember when Jane was born. Parents of newborns. They were talking about. So there's a score called an Apgar Score. It doesn't have anything to do with their future. And so they're saying, well, my kid had an Apgar Score of this and that. I'm going, you got to be kidding me. One of my grandchildren was born premature. He's only 3 pounds, right? His Apgar Score wasn't too good, but he was, 2 months premature, So it's not meaning, but I just saw this comparative thing, and it was like a little bit unnerving to me. And, late talking children, many of them are good in visual spatial. Many of them end up really good in math and science. Early on, we really put an emphasis on talking, and because their talking is down, this comparative thing can really
drive you crazy.
Can be, especially, you're going to see your late talker, and they're using, at age 4, like my son, they're using these little short phrases, and these other kids are having full-on conversations, and that could be a panic moment if you're not, really focused on where your child is.
So the first language burst, is there a second language burst that comes to mind?
So there is. So there's what happens is the children kind of learn initial vocabulary in that toddler phase, and then they have kind of a rapid, we call it a vocabulary burst, where they just accelerate and they're learning multiple words per day. It's quite remarkable when you see it in real time. But it also happens, it's not as well understood, but it also happens with what we call grammar, which is grammar are the rules for putting words together into sentences, and then also how you use word endings like plurals and possessives like book, books, mommy, mommy's, cat, whatever it is. And children have a burst for that as well. Late talkers, nope, they take their time in all these areas.
So at what age is it considered late talker to then be able to receive intervention?
So nowadays, there's a push for universal screening for autism. So really, by the time a child reaches 2, the pediatricians maybe refer the parents, if their child's late talking, for an evaluation, and that could lead to what's called early intervention services. If there's something else, like, in other words, so talking itself is important. It's the primary thing parents come to pediatricians with, but if there's other learning challenges like motor development, if you notice their play is immature, then there might be reasons for getting services earlier than that.
How long do those services typically last, like the average child who needs them?
So again, it depends on whether the late talking is a symptom and what it's a symptom of. So for some children, it might go into high school and beyond. Like my late talking son, he actually had intervention support through the schools all the way through middle school. He had so initially we did language intervention, and I actually did a lot of that. Actually, it's kind of funny. When he was older, he said I took Mondays off and just worked with him all day, and he thought that was so cool. And the other children were like, "Hey, how come you're hanging out with Vincent all day?" Well, he needs it. But anyway,
you
when he
like
was
him better? No.
Yeah, because he's my favorite child, which is not true at all. I tell my little granddaughter goes, Papa, am I your favorite? And I said, yep, you're tied for first with 18 other children. And so he absolutely was tied for first in my affections. But then when he was older, he said, oh, you were working with me, weren't you? He kind of dawned on him that this fun time with Dad was actually language intervention. Other children, particularly like when it's a stage, you're just going to have this burst and catch up. And parents may not even remember that their child was late talking unless you interview them. Like sometimes families will have multiple late talkers and, I'll be saying, oh, how about the older child? And they'll say, oh, that's right. So-and-so, they didn't talk at all till they were 2, but then, man, they just really accelerated. And, this other child I have, he's taking more time about it. And that can happen too.
Yeah. We talked about starting those interventions. But what's a reasonable amount of time for a family to go through all of those and not see progress before maybe they reevaluate what's going on and take a different approach?
So what's really important, and I do want to refer people to the podcast or the webcast on developmental interventions and frameworks. So a good developmentalist will know where that child is. They'll know kind of because of that, how much they've learned in that amount of time, what's next and how long it should take. You can't tell precisely, but you should have an estimate for it. And so what I always tell parents is, this is what it's important for your child to learn next. This is how I want you to do it, and this is how long I think it's going to take. And if the progress isn't happening in the way I thought, I really want you to reach out to me because we have to make adjustments. So, I would say really chart your month-to-month, progress. Now, having said that, I might be working on let's say a child has a speech disorder, I might be working on just increasing the different kinds of vowels they have in their vocalizations. So that developmental target should be just the next thing that's happening in the sequence. So you wouldn't want to say, oh, in the next month, I want this child who's having these severe speech problems to be able to talk in sentences. That doesn't make sense, So you want to really make sure that the goals are realistic, but you definitely want to do progress monitoring to see how it's going and adjust the intervention based on the progress.
Do you ever have a child who is making progress and then suddenly stops talking?
So that's really not uncommon. And so one of the early publications that I did in my doctoral work and just after is that children will do trade-offs. And so my dissertation, I want people to, let's say I have insomnia, to read my dissertation, it'll cure your insomnia. It turns out that in terms of pronunciation, when children try more complex words, the pronunciation is worse. So you have this kind of trade-off. So it's okay if there's a plateau or even a slight regression, as long as something else is advancing. So your developmental specialist should be able to look across domains and say, oh, they're using longer sentences, so their pronunciation now is actually decreasing a bit. You want to have an explanation. If there's an across-the-board decline, get them into a physician right away, try to figure out, because that shouldn't happen.
Are there common causes for that, or
the main one I get in? Well, so two things. We sometimes have genetic conditions where that's part of it, but the main one that I've seen, and it's biased just because it's the kind of kids I see, is seizures. Now, not all seizures cause regressions, but a lot of times when I see a regression, it's associated with seizure. And I've had a few cases where there's actually like a tumor or something else medically that's going on, and that's really where I'm not a physician. That's my physician colleagues have to take care of that. But right. I'm kind of the tripwire. So if a parent says to me, my child is, making these regressions, then and there's not a trade-off explanation, then I need to say, hey, look, you need to see your pediatrician right away, and I'll try to broker that.
How common is that? Like, do you typically see most children making progress, even if it's
extremely
little
uncommon.
bit? Okay.
It's very uncommon.
Okay.
No, the trade-off part's very common. All of us
Sure.
have trade-offs, in all that we do, and all of us have relative strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's why humans are so good and adaptive. Collectively, we have a lot of expertise, but any one of us may only have expertise in one thing,
Okay.
So like if I were interviewing people as well as you, or tried to do as well as you, I would not have a job. So luckily I'm a professor that does what I do, and I can do that, but I really couldn't do what you do for lots of reasons.
Well, thank you, Steve. I was going to say,
true.
I'm here, but you should see the laundry piling up at home because I haven't
That's
got
a trade-off that I was talking
That's
about,
right.
okay? So if we're charting your interviewing behavior, we're seeing progress.
That's
we're
right.
charting your longer behavior, we see
It's
a
going
plateau
back.
or
That's
perhaps
right.
a regression for other reasons. So a very good metaphor that you walked us into.
I recently had the pleasure of talking to a parent who has a late talker. And she kind of said that as they were working through, right, all the interventions, the speech pathology work, that she just expected her son to plateau. Mm-hmm. And now he's in his 20s, and she's still seeing language development. And just the look in her eyes of the excitement of that, I just want to talk a little bit about that it doesn't stop after a certain age.
No, and it's really interesting. So the notion of a critical period for language really has to do with language learning where you can learn a language without an accent. There's a really good review that the psychologist at Harvard, Stephen Pinker, published recently. So basically, there's this idea that if you don't learn language by the time you're 9 or 10, then that's it. The critical period is. But that's really like let's say you're learning English and you get let's say you're learning Spanish and you get exposed to it before you're 10, you have a higher probability of being able to speak Spanish without an accent. So you can learn, I wish I would take it on. I could learn Spanish really, even though I'm 66 years old right now. You can keep learning languages, but my learning Spanish, I would have an accent. But you can keep learning languages, and you keep learning things. And so, I'm so happy to see that. And by the way, I remember working with Down syndrome where I work with colleagues in the schools who would say, well, we're not doing any more language intervention with Down syndrome because now they're older than 10. They had this belief that was it, and it's just wrong. And it's a misinterpretation of critical period for learning language that people seem to believe, but it's just not true. And so I hate it that she felt that way. And if it's a family I work with, I hate it that I didn't really emphasize that. But I'm really glad to hear about her joy, because absolutely. And children with Down syndrome actually have a vocabulary burst in their teen years. So the opposite of that is true.
Well, I will add to this story that it was, the building blocks of the words, the sentences. What she's experiencing now with her son, a late talker in his 20s, is the nuances. Mm-hmm. He is finally figuring out the subtlety and sarcasm.
Oh, good, yeah. And that could be good and bad.
Right? Exactly. But I just thought how beautiful. And for anyone who's going through this journey, maybe their child's 5, 6, and they think, well, they're going to peak at some point. Let me tell you, this mom is still experiencing joy in the way that her child is learning. And it's super exciting to hear.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made that point. It's absolutely true. The learning continues. You shouldn't panic and say if they don't have language by 10, they're not going to learn anymore. That's just really not how it works. Most late talkers are going to have their language really well established by 10. Some don't. When the late talking is a symptom of slower learning, for example, it's going to go longer than that. But there's always learning that's going to happen. And that's why this developmental framework is important, because you don't want to waste a child's valuable learning time by trying to make them jump ahead faster than they can do, or teaching them stuff that's not essential or not relevant to their lives. And so I love this story. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up today about that? Or?
Yeah. The thing about a late talker is it's really important when we step back and think about their life. So late talkers, people are always trying to fit them into this societal norm mold. And this is true for everybody, but for late talkers even more so. And so it's really important to step back and try to understand the late talker's perspective and kind of where their journey is, and try to make it a partnership as opposed to we're going to try to spend your life making you conform to a model that doesn't necessarily fit you. We do want to encourage learning. We just, I'm not saying abandon that, but we definitely want to be individualized, and we want to think about what does it mean for the late talker and how we do it. One of the late talkers that I worked with many years ago, I just got a note from his mom, and he's now becoming a priest. But part of the narrative that I got from it was that he really was looking at his life very differently than others, and so on. Choosing to be a Catholic priest isn't really a high a high frequency event in our society, but for him it was the journey that he took, and it led him there. And I'm not saying late talkers are necessarily going to be priests. It's just that wasn't what his parents envisioned for him at all, but they're really excited and really happy that this is, what his choice is in his life.
Share your stories with us. Please feel free to leave those in the comments here. You can email us. You can always go onto the Late Talkers Foundation website and hear other family stories as well. We love to share that. So please, you can hit subscribe also, because we want to keep getting you information. Hit that bell. And I am going to tell you, it's Late Talkers Foundation.org.
It's latetalkers.org.
Oh, Late Talkers, or excuse me,
latetalkers.org.
latetalkers.org.
Yeah,
Thank
that's the
goodness
foundation
you're here,
website.
Steve.
Well, maybe. Thank goodness you're here. And remember, the best thing for your child is you.